Metaphor ReFantazio is a story about the importance and strength of relentless sincerity, kindness, and compassion in the face of an endlessly cruel, cynical, and despairing world. It is also a video game, which rewards that persistence of never giving up hope on the potential of sincerity. It has a plot which explores the multitude of difficulties and struggles and tensions that arise when trying to build an inclusive, multiracial democracy. It has a conflict that evolves and oozes from the ease with which tensions rooted in fear and anxiety of any change to a status quo can be easily manipulated as a power-building tool for would-be fascists. It's a fantasy! So if one zooms out on Metaphor ReFantazio, the broad strokes of the game's plot can be boiled down to the same old trappings of many, many other JRPGs and animes and their tropes. For example, in Metaphor ReFantazio, an amnesiac special boy of destiny uses the power of friendship to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds against a tyrant who would otherwise become a god. This is an easy critique to make, but I argue it is a lazy one as well. No matter how many times you've played something written into that framework, those are still good bones to build from. It's in the details of what you sculpt around those bones that can make a game a truly special experience or make it destined to be part of a bargain bin special. Metaphor breathes with so much more life than other games due to its meticulous love and attention to detail that shows up in its art direction, its political coherence, and its interpersonal relationship development. The plot, that is the specifics of what happens to get us from point A to B to C, etc., and so on, that's not specifically what makes me love Metaphor ReFantazio. It is the life given to its world and its characters, which exist as delicate, sinewy networks of gameplay, art, and story, all holding together the more generic elements of that plot. That is what had me weeping here on my couch over and over and over again throughout my 85 hours in its nation of Uchronia. Those more intimate, artistic, mechanical, and storytelling details, and the ways that they're woven into character progression, that is the true heart and soul of what may now be one of my favorite games of all time. So please, if you would, indulge me for just a little while. I'm going to pop off about Metaphor ReFantazio. Anyway, I am Josh, aka Carl's manager here on YouTube, if that's where you're watching this. That's the only part of this that's going to be super scripted. I do not feel that's especially my strongest format, but I do have a few notes as I think my way through what I loved about Metaphor ReFantazio. Hey, it's me, that same guy from a couple weeks and dozens of hours of editing in the future, and this is a spoiler warning. There's no major plot spoiling, no major twist spoiling. However, there may be a visual thing here and there that if you're very sleuthy, you could put together that it spoiled something for the late game. The thing that is spoilery is a couple of details of late game bond quests with individual characters. I'll pop something on the screen when we get to that point, which is towards the end of the video. All right, let's go back to it. First and foremost, let's talk about the art direction, because that's the reason I bought the game. I think my first experience of witnessing anything for this game was maybe during the Game of the Year awards last year, 2023. There might have been a reveal trailer or like one of the first trailers, and I got real excited when I saw one of the designs for one of the bosses, which now that the game's out, we know these are what are referred to in the world as humans. And I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, that boss monster is from Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. That something about that painting it's just like has always spoken to me since I was a teenager. There's like some weird creepiness to it, and it's also like something that's kind of always poignant. If you're not familiar with it, most of the human monsters in Metaphor ReFantazio come from Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. A few come from other paintings, triptychs of his, and some enemies even just have his signature on the back, which are his initials. Like it'll just be like a tattoo on their body somewhere. That grabbed me right away when I saw that in a trailer. Full disclosure, I am not a Atlas fanboy. I've not played all the Personas, but I've now purchased Persona 5 to play when I've gotten Metaphor out of my system. But I'm aware of the monster design style, the way it really goes out there sometimes. The weirdness of the monsters wasn't it. It was the fact that it was pulled straight from a Bosch painting that got me. Then I started playing the game, and all of its influences just like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh yeah, I like this. These people pay attention to stuff, and they like to actually use influences very deliberately and intentionally. The most obvious one that stood out first is honestly I'm going to talk about it's the fashion. I remember, I think in my first stream, just talking about the protagonist's outfits. He has this coat and satchel that just like it just pops. The character design is out of this world excellent. The choice to put this blend of modern high fashion. There's a YouTube channel that maybe I'll dig up the name of that did about a 30-minute documentary on the making of Metaphor ReFantazio, and they spoke to basically most of the different like art departments, and the character designer talked about how important the fashion was, and that it was so much of it was pulled from like high-end brands. I don't remember the ones he mentioned. Like Gucci comes to mind. I don't think he mentioned that. Versace, that kind of thing. And specifically of the 70s. And he talked about how even the hair and the makeup is influenced by that stuff. So it's like whether or not I even am in love with that era of fashion, the fact that such a conscious, intentional, and deliberate choice was made and executed so well already gets a thumbs up from me. It gets full buy-in from me. But then on top of that, it is blended with other influences, both in the fashion, the architecture, the music. They really were trying to do like a sort of real, genuine, diverse exploration of culture, the way that the nation is built, and in all those areas. So I guess I'm already talking about the modern influence. So I'll also talk about like this. I only learned from watching the documentary is that the music, which my understanding from what I've listened to of the Persona soundtracks is that the composer is very good at this sort of like jazz fusion. I don't know, maybe like a little city pop influence, and people love those soundtracks for that. So when he came into this was like, oh, it's a fantasy setting, and he knew he had to do something different. He went back to sort of the old composing board, and he said, oh, I need to go find diverse influences that still feel new to like our audiences. So he really studied musics from like indigenous cultures that the Japanese and Western audience that the game was made for might not already be familiar with, but then like use them in really respectful ways that play out very nicely. Of course, we all know now and love the Japanese chanting monk that they pulled in to do all the vocal parts in Esperanto. Is like, that's an all-time banger battle theme. I never got tired of listening to the battle theme of this Japanese role-playing game that I played for 85 hours. You will not hear me say that about any other Japanese role-playing game. Back to the roots in the art direction. We started with, in the trailers, I saw, ooh, bang, cool, Bosch, love it. And then we also have a lot more drawn from Renaissance era. There's a lot of Leonardo da Vinci. The Vitruvian Man, which is that thing with the arms and the legs, it's part of the menu design. The game uses a class system a la like Final Fantasy V, and the way you choose your job is that they are all laid out in different components on top of a model of the Vitruvian Man. There's also portions in the menu where your characters are what we might modernly call T-posing, but they're actually filling different parts of the Vitruvian Man. But then, like, there's also very Da Vinci-esque things if you're not familiar with him as a quote-unquote inventor. You can think of Da Vinci as like the early steampunk guy. If you go look at some of his ideas for like flying machines, et cetera, that I think shows up a lot in the Gauntlet Runner design of this world. Instead of airships, we have what are called Gauntlet Runners. And I can actually probably go look it up because the game has a wonderful deep lore encyclopedia thing you can explore. But they're sort of these like half living things. They like move like dragons, but they're airships or ground ships. They're very Da Vinci-esque in their design. And then a very impressionist influenced. My brain goes to like anytime you look at the sky in the game, or you just look in the distance, there's a very like smeared, smudgy, very purposefully smudgy, not like, oh, it's blurry because it's low res. It's a design choice that is based in impressionism. All these things are thrown into the visual and audio pot to create something that is truly representative of humanity in a fantasy world where humans are monsters that are the enemy. And then as we continue the real world influence outside of just the art direction, our dear friend Moore in the world of academia. So this is sort of the base building hub of Metaphor ReFantazio. The protagonist carries around a book, and he is called into it by this character who's trapped in it, who wrote it. The details aren't that important, but that character's name is Moore, named after Thomas More, author of the book Utopia here in the real world. Throughout the game, the protagonist will share the book that Moore is living inside of. He'll share chapters of it with his comrades and his friends, and they'll read it together. And when we see it as the player, we see that what's in the book is a utopian vision of our real world. We see things in there that are clearly from our modern world. A idea of what society at that time could look like if built as a utopia. The protagonist is holding on to this as their vision of fantasy because the world he lives in is a little messy. It's a little racist. It's a little theocratic. It's a little fascist. There's a lot of problems going on, and our buddy's got to solve them somehow. That's not really his original intention going into the game, but we get there eventually. Again, you kill God through the power of friendship. But that does lead us into discuss what some of my favorite thematic uses of metaphor are throughout the game. Favorite might be strong. Sometimes they feel a little too close to home. I want to talk about our main antagonist, Luis. The game opens with a guy in sort of a big regal white gown stabbing a guy, and everybody freaks out. Turns out he killed the king. They make no bones about hiding who did this murder. It's this guy, Luis. And after a sort of prologue introductory mission, we are in the main city of Grand Trad, I believe is the name of it. And the king's funeral is happening. And this Luis guy shows up. He ascends down upon the people. And it seems that like people know him. He's like a general or something. My experience watching this scene, and this is maybe a good point to identify the period at which I played the game. The demo came out, I believe, late September 2024, and I played it and finished it late November of 2024. So I played it through about that 2-month period. It's really hard to talk about this game without talking about the reality of politics where I live, the United States of America, that were happening at this time. It ain't good. part of why I don't want to talk about this is because people look at it in a very binary way. You either liked Kamala Harris.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Or you liked Donald Trump.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
And that's the way it is. And that's a way oversimplification of how bad and messy the political situation in this country is. I'm not a fan of either of those people, but I'm really not a fan of the guy who won for reasons much more nuanced than because he's an orange mango, whatever. And I even hesitate to talk about the analogous ways that it shows up in the game and even peg them in this one-to-one thing. But again, when you place yourself in the time and place that I played this game, what was happening? And I also throw in that I work in political communications for a living, for, I'll just say, left of the Democratic Party. It hit pretty hard when Luis descends and he drops the body of what he tells people is a dead human. And we've fought a human at this point. Both of these humans are characters from Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And the one he drops is probably it's the most biggest obvious character in that painting. This huge thing that he drops and says he slayed it, and that these humans are infiltrators from outside who are coming to take what you have.
They're eating the cats.
And he's saying this to a population that is already very fearful and very anxious because of internal issues they are already facing. I've been sort of just joking to myself that wow, within the first 3 hours, this game opens with fascism 101. And I know that's the big scary word. It's cringe to some people, and it's, I don't know, the wrong word for other people. But I want to go over just a few things. In 2003, there was a political scientist, Dr. Lawrence Britt, who published a piece called 14 Characteristics of Fascism. And maybe I'll put some of the things Louis says during his introduction here on screen right now as I read a few of those. And in no particular order. Identification of enemies/scapegoats as a unifying cause. Another, supremacy of the military. Another one, obsession with national security. Another one, obsession with crime and punishment. Now, there were 14 characteristics of fascism, according to Lawrence. And if we continue to analyze the nation of Ukrainia and the government of Grand Trad, we don't know this much at this point in the game, but there's also a theocracy that sort of manages things from behind the scenes. And I didn't write down the other 14 points of fascism. I'm just going to run through the ones that Luis doesn't already directly do in his opening speech that are happening in the Kingdom of Ukrainia. Disdain for the recognition of human rights. There's a very heavy race-based caste system in the game. When we enter the city of Grand Trad, we see, I believe it's a parapist. They're these cat or dog-eared people. It seems we're witnessing him getting hanged, and it's also kind of obvious that there hasn't been a trial of any sort. We have controlled mass media. There are these criers who work for the church. One of the most popular ones, he's your narrative guide through this election that basically ends up being the momentum through the game. And we find out that he's also a paid crony of the church, and he kind of goes rogue when he realizes he's kind of on your side. And then there is that corporate power is protected. In this case, that is focused within the Sanctus Church. It is racial. There's, I believe it's the Rothgar race. They have horns. These are the higher caste people. These are the corporate powers that be in the world. And even amongst them, there's only certain people who have certain connections who really get a say in how anything works in the nation of Ukrainia. And over time, we learn that the excuse they kind of make for this is that the king lost hope. It's just kind of a convenient way to make this monarchism angle work, which is one of my few critiques of the game. The monarchist vibe didn't really do it for me, but it's I can let that stuff go. is fine. And then the final of these 14 points, these identifiers of fascism, is the one which the game forces to be broken. It forces a chance onto the protagonist, and that is fraudulent elections. So after Luis's speech where he comes down and he's like, hey, here's fascism. You guys into it? And half the crowd is like, yeah! We find out that there's something called the King's Magic that is forcing a true democratic election of the next king to happen. However, because Luis, as the strongman fascist, already has so much support, the King's Magic protects him from assassination to make sure that it's truly the will of the people that will decide who the next king is. That's the broad strokes of the political story that is driving Metaphor ReFantazio. We've got a oligarchic theocracy that's already in power, maintaining the status quo. That's not working for a lot of lower caste people. In comes Luis. He says, hey, you guys heard of fascism? It's really cool. And by the way, I might make a pretty good leader of it. And then your character, the protagonist, as he's being influenced by his utopian fantasy book, it's actually kind of left in the player's hands to decide. What does he do with the fact that anyone could be king and he has a vision? By the way, he's also the lowest caste race, which is known as the Elda. Also, by the way, he is friends with the prince who has been cursed, and his main objective is to try to uncurse the prince as the rightful ruler of the throne. Good God, I don't think I'm going to get into the details of the plot too much more than this. This is all just to set up the fact that you, the protagonist, inhabit this character, and you decide how you want to develop a leader. And there's a whole mess of experiences and game mechanics that give you the opportunity to decide that. And there are limitations built into the amount of, let's just call it grind, that you are able to do throughout the game thanks to it using the calendar system. It limits how much you can do in a day. So, in true fantasy, let's say a Final Fantasy, a game like that, I can go grind away at side quests. I can grind away at fighting bad guys until I am the ultimate god king. I could rule anything. This game shows you the limitations of personal development, for lack of a better term. There are a number of different avenues you have to develop your character and reward systems for that you are a little bit limited in how much time you can spend in each of these avenues. It brought out a true min-maxing goblin inside of me playing the game, but it also is a really, really brilliant, fun way to use game mechanics to teach a lot of ideals of moral leadership. I'm going to attempt to use the relationship that the protagonist has with what was one of my favorite characters to try to spiderweb out and explain how and why your decisions build the boons that they do within the game mechanics, and how they teach you, the player, about how to be sincere, compassionate, empathetic, all those things I said early on. So, one of my favorite characters, she is a priestess of what's called the Mastari tribe in the game. They look like normal humans, except that they have a third eye, where is the third eye chakra. Anyway, there's a character, Yufa, the priestess of that tribe, who ends up joining your party. She joins your party after finding out basically that their pagan religion was a sham that was going to have her sacrifice her life to basically just follow like a rote ritual. So after this main story scenario that introduces you to Yufa and you save her from being sacrificed to her religion, she joins you to stop Luis, and you can make another stop in the region that she's from on just like a side quest to, I don't remember the side quest, but you find something for her. And this introduces you to your first bonding scenario, I guess that's what we can call them, with Yufa. And the way the game works, there's a bunch of main characters that you can have these like bonding side quests for. Each of those is a separate side story broken into, I believe it's 8 parts, where that character becomes the main character. The protagonist is there as a support for them and their journey. Whatever this side quest was, you get your first level bond with Yufa. By doing these bonds, you unlock more powers, you unlock better experience grinding for that character, you unlock little boons of like sometimes you'll get items daily, all sorts of little things as you go through the list of each character's bond grind, I guess we can call that. This begins your bond with Yufa, which it's really adorable. You accidentally hold hands and she gets really embarrassed because in her culture, holding hands can mean 2 things. It can mean like a greeting or I have a crush on you. And this is the only romantic element of the game, is this comes up maybe 2 more times at most in her like bond quest line. So now your opportunities to bond with Yufa have been mixed in with your daily to-dos. Every day, you could choose one thing to do during the day, one thing to do at night. And if you bond with somebody, then that's the only thing you can do that day. The day is over, you're on night. Now, maybe you can bond with somebody else, or you can do another thing that is going to sort of spiderweb out from the relationship with Yufa. And that is your, what are these called? Like the kingly attributes or something. So there's a few stats in the game that are specific to just the protagonist and how he interacts with the world. And it gatekeeps certain elements of character and relationship development. So these are divided into courage, wisdom, tolerance, eloquence, and imagination. I think I got them all. The way you develop these is you can either bond with somebody or you can go do activities which will give you points in each of these 5 categories. What I loved about Yufa as a character is you spend a lot of time in the game sort of road tripping on those gauntlet runner things I talked about way earlier. And when you're in the gauntlet runner, sometimes you'll be there for a few days and you have to pass time in the gauntlet runner. And for the most part, I think each of the main characters has like an activity they like to do. One likes to clean their weapons. One likes to play a strategy game. I don't remember the others because honestly, I didn't do them that much, but I did all of Yufa's series of kingly attribute development or whatever you want to call it, because her activity was meditation. And my memory of the game as I played it was that most of the time, if you did these activities with your comrades on the Gauntlet Runner, you'd get 3 points to wisdom, you'd get 3 points to courage, something like that. And the first time you do meditation with Yufa, I want to say it gives you 6 points to imagination, 5 or 6. My memory is that out of all these activities, that's the most that one has given. And it just really hit me that it felt like I was being told this ability to sit still amidst your fear and anxiety is something the game developers, the story writers are telling me is important. And each time you sit and meditate with Yufa, you can choose how you want to respond to her about like how the meditation went after it's done. You'll also like, it'll show thoughts popping into the protagonist's head while they're meditating. So what happens after you're done meditating is Yufa will maybe ask you like, how did it go? And you'll have 3 things to choose from. And this is something we've seen a lot up to this game, are these one-on-one interactions with other characters where we can usually choose 3 things. And there's usually kind of 3 varying degrees of, I don't know, like seriousness or earnestness to them. And so we've been seeing these things a lot. We're going to spiderweb out one more time. Early on in the game, our friend Moore, who lives in academia, the world inside of the book, he has given us the power to absorb what's called magla from people we're interacting with. Magla is a currency in the game that is spent to develop your character's job class attributes. So that's what it does mechanically. Within the story, you can think of it, it's like a sharing of energy, and more specifically, like a sharing of response to fear and anxiety. Those words come up over and over and over again. I don't know if I've already said that, but it's worth repeating. This is like the most important thing in the entire game. Moore gives you this power early on that it boils down to, I actually texted my partner this. I took a picture of the screen when it gave me this power to absorb magla from people I'm talking to. And I was just like, oh my God, there's a mechanic built into this game that rewards you for active listening and empathetic response. That's really all this mechanic is. I love it. So the more inclined you are to go towards the empathetic, sincere response to whoever the protagonist is interacting with, the more you are rewarded with very precious limited resources within the game. So let's pull out of the spider web back to meditation with Yufa. When you're done meditating with Yufa, she will ask you a question with, you could give one of 3 responses. And the more sincere you are in responding to her, the more you are rewarded with positive magla energy from her. And that goes into your mag points that you spend on job progression. And what's interesting is you as the player are given an insight beforehand, before Yufa asks like, how did it go? And I want to say the first time you're trying to meditate and your character's like, man, this is really hard. I can't stop my thoughts. And one of the options is to just be honest with her that it was hard. I think another option is to lie and just be like, oh, it's whatever, I was good. Or like 1 or 2, something like that. I did not go through all 3 of those. I did not reset the game and do it 3 times to prove this, but I'm pretty sure I chose the more honest answer and was rewarded with these 3 triangles of magla from Yufa to me, which is usually means you did the best answer. Every once in a great while towards the end game, you get 4. The game reinforces through mechanics, empathy, sincerity, kindness, compassion. This is how you become a good, I hesitate to say leader, but that is what it is doing. It's teaching leadership through these characteristics, not strength, not fear, not anxiety inducing, not scapegoating, not blaming people. It's telling you over and over again through game mechanics, through rewards, points you can spend on valuable things that keep you alive in battle, that you gain from your friends. These are the things that are important. These are the things that you need to fight back against the fascist who is trying to scare everyone. And then later in the game, we learn more about like this kind of idea of magla is just this sort of energetic force of there's fear and anxiety in the air. And a fascist like Luis can manipulate it to be a weapon, a tool, and make things worse for everyone. Or somebody like our protagonist can use it through empathy and sincerity to ideally build a utopia, which I kind of like. So the game is honest. The game doesn't tell you, and everything will be happily ever after once you're king. Down the last 20 to 30 hour stretch, as it's becoming possible within the world and clear to you, the player, that like, oh dang, my character is the one who's gunning to be king. It's telling you this isn't a guarantee of everything's going to be as utopian as it is in your fantasy book. You're still going to have to work, but you've built these relationships. You've built an ability to lean on people, to be empathetic, and to listen to people, that you'll at least have a shot. Whereas the other guy, the fascist guy, he just wants to destroy everything. You find out basically Luis is pretty much just a nihilist who wants revenge for something bad and traumatic that happened to him when he was young and wants everything to go back to zero. Sound familiar? But anyway, let's go back to Yufa one more time. Everyone has this series of 8 bonding scenarios. She decides that after her religion has sort of betrayed her, she wants to learn about the mainland religion of sanctism. She goes on this journey where, wouldn't you know it, she finds out it's also just a little bit corrupt. But and as her like bond boons is what I've been calling them, the things you get as you go each bond level deeper goes, as she is learning about the shortcomings of dogma, of belief, one of the things that unlocks through her bonding boons is that your party becomes less susceptible to a status ailment that's just literally called anxiety. And it'll inflict automatically throughout the game if like something bad happens in battle, like say a character just swings and misses too many times, or they get critical hit too hard, or you get surprised at the beginning of a battle. So the more she learns and accepts about the complications and the shortcomings of the faith that she was raised in, and then just pure dogmatic faith at large, the better she becomes at managing the anxiety of herself and her friends and comrades. I love it. I could go on and on. I could do a synopsis of the story. I probably wouldn't be very good at it because holy moly, there's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a whole lot of plot here. And that's why I really just wanted to dig into just some of the character stuff and how it works its way out into the mechanics and how you develop your party throughout the game. I do also want to touch on one other character's story because I cried a lot during this game. I'm going to say they were tears of hope and grief over and over again. The other character that hit me even harder is this little bat guy, Heisme. Heisme he's an old guy. He was a knight and he's been in exile for a long time. You're told through the story, and people in town believe he's in exile because he's doing this horrible thing to this town he's terrorizing. Nobody really knows who he is. He's just this name Heisme they have attributed this like terrible thing to. And so you're assigned to go get him, capture him. And then when you meet him, you realize he's just this sweetest man in this cute little bat body. And the reason he's in exile is he is dealing with shame and grief from not being able to protect and losing his son. I'm not going to share too much to strangers here, but I will say I went through something with my partner this year that resulted in a lot of grief that we don't know how to deal with, how to move through. The world does not have a script for it. For better or worse, like my partner and I think we move through these things together really well, but then like we also have like there's some ways you have to deal with things solo. And she's a very like I move through things physically. She's like a use yoga as emotional processing type of person, and I love that. I can do a little bit of that, but it's not the whole thing for me. For me, stories do that a lot. And what you learn about Heisman, his bonding story, is that he has to find a burial site for the cremated bones of his son. And you go through some ups and downs. And it's very important to him that it's the right place for him. But his son was very young. He doesn't have a rich depth of life experience to say like, my son loved it here, so we should go there. So he's like, I don't know, I guess our hometown. But he is an outcast to his hometown. They're a little bit xenophobic. They're very xenophobic there, but also for like good reason, because they are a low caste race. And like you see the political messiness of all that, which is its own separate thing from like why this story hit me. But you go through this whole journey of like, where do I lay my son's bones to rest? And eventually he lands on, you come to visit him, and he has a little cute little tent that he sets up in your gauntlet runner. So you come in at night. This is late in the game. You notice the urn with Heismay's child's bones are nowhere around. And you ask him like, what's up with that? Did you find a good spot? Heismay tells you that he has decided that he's going to carry his son in a locket over his heart so that he's always with him while he's fighting for a better future. Holy moly, the way that hit me. I sat and wept for quite a while. That stupid little bat cartoon character just wrecked me. And I think that's the core of why this game is so important to me. I talked earlier about this time and place that I'm playing it, and like what a mess the political world around me is, which is my day job, is to deal with and try to fix that. And this game provided a fantasy that says, look, here are the tools to do that work, to try to fix that. We can't promise that they'll work, but we know if anything's going to work, it is empathy, it is compassion, and it is sincerity. And I finished the game about a week ago, and I've been handling, I think, I'm just going to keep calling it the political situation, better than people around me. Some of it is I am mentally prepared for it. And I think a lot of it was because I was able to indulge in the fantasy of this game, of a world where I could embody somebody who can easily make those choices over and over again and actually see them make a difference. And since I finished the game a week ago, I'm not actively thinking about these real world situations, but I am noticing that I don't feel good. The veil is lifting a little. It was an escape, and it's time to go back, you know? Does that make it a good idea to spend 85 hours in this world? I'm going to say yeah. Because I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff every day. And even I needed the reinforcement of hope comes from, I'm going to say it again, kindness, empathy, compassion, sincerity, not fear, not anxiety. The game also reinforces, again, something I knew, but it was helpful, I think, to have it reinforced, even if it's kind of like hurting now to leave the fantasy. But the main point in the game, fear and anxiety are inevitable. And you can either be consumed by them And the game plays a funny little thing and says that's what makes you turn into a human. That's what makes you turn into one of the hellish monsters in the third panel of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And a lot of people are choosing that right now. And I see it every day. So it was nice to live in a world where it feels easy to fight it. The other option with fear and anxiety is you face it. You stare it down. You say, I'm not going to run away. And you accept it. And when the characters in this game do that for the first time, each of them, they literally rip their heart out of their chest. And it's this mechanical, I don't know, it's a heart, but it's like a mechanical thing. And that heart metaphor keeps coming up. You see it, you see the symbolism of it around. But they rip their heart out, and usually it's screaming. And then they turn into this mega mech archetype. It's God, it's so stupid, but it's so good. And that's where their power comes from, is to just truly say, I'm doing this from my heart. I'm not going to be cynical. I'm not going to be sarcastic. I'm just pouring my heart out, or I'm speaking from my heart. If we're going to put it in modern parlance, it's lean into cringe. Lean into sincerity, as cringe as it is. Yeah. That's really hard to do. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I really think that's the way we save ourselves. It's as simple as that. And even then, like the game reminds us, you've only got just a chance. And then to make it work, everybody has to get up every day and keep choosing to be kind, to be sincere, to be empathetic, to be compassionate over and over and over again. And it's pretty tiring. But I'm glad that the makers of this game found a way to teach those lessons to anybody ready to receive it and make like the journey really fun. I play a fair amount of games, and my partner does not. I shared a lot of like screenshots and clips as I was playing this game with her, and just telling her like, this made me cry, that made me cry, this made me cry. Because I think it's just, I like knowing that, you know, the target demographic for this is probably like teenagers, early 20-somethings, people who haven't already read and absorbed and thought about all the media that I have, and they can just take it at face value. And it's like, you know, there's probably a lot of people who are going to consume this as just another piece of content and move on. And that's fine. But I know there's kids out there that are going to find this and like, it's going to change something in them. And I know that because other games did that to me that weren't doing nearly as good and in depth and as thorough a job as this. So on behalf of the children, I guess, thank you, Studio Zero and Atlas. It's very good.
Once I learned what frustrated me, what I refused to compromise on, I knew then who I really am at my core. It led me to a realization. I only want to live in a world where you exist.
We both need to live a long time together then, don't we?
Of course. There is so much in store for us. I wouldn't want to miss it.
I don't really know how to end this now. So thankfully, if anybody watched this long, I already have your attention. So I don't necessarily need to do some big wraparound conclusion. This isn't high school. I don't have to bookend my thesis or whatever. You kind of saw what I had to say. If you like it, like and subscribe. I hate that I'm saying that, but tell your friends to play the game. Honestly, if you do have somebody who's like struggling with the state of the world right now, that it would be up for 80 some hours of a Japanese role-playing game. I know I said I'm having a hard time leaving it behind, but I'm really glad that I had it at this moment. It meant a lot to me for whatever reason. Again, I'm not going to give too many intimate details, but it held me up in ways that, like, partner, friends, whatever, like, they can't quite do. Some of us just need fantasy. Some of us need stories to process. I give it a strong recommend for anybody like that. So thanks for watching. May our fantasies someday be reality. Is that a thing to say? I don't know.